Okay, quick story time. I was watching YouTube a few days ago and then this video popped into my recommendation.
The home cooks have gathered everything they need to make Michael Bonacini's signature Scallop Mousse.
So this is an episode of MasterChef Canada where they try to recreate Michael Bonacini, which is one of the judges, Scallop Mousse. I don't usually watch TV shows that much, so I don't really know how MasterChef work, but I felt like this was one of the dishes on there that didn't require that much ingredients and is totally doable at home. So I decided to give it a try, just like any normal person would do. So this is my attempt on replicating this MasterChef dish, Scallop Mousse. The only clip that I saw of this MasterChef Scallop Mousse is that short clip on YouTube. So I had to do a lot of research to figure out this recipe. Typically, scallops aren't made into a mousse because it's essentially turning a beautiful piece of ingredient with amazing texture and chopping it into a paste. Either way, this was a recipe and cooking process I came up with to mimic the one presented in MasterChef as closely as possible, so I decided to share it. I had a hard time finding whole lobsters for sale, so I'll be using 3 lobster claws to provide the lobster meat of this dish. To begin, I am going to lightly boil the lobster claws. In a saucepan filled with some water, I'm seasoning heavily with salt to mimic the ocean, dropping in some peppercorns, a crushed clove of garlic, a twig of rosemary, and 2 bay leaves. Setting that over medium-high heat to bring to a boil. While the water is heating up, I am patting dry 110 grams or about 5 sea scallops, making sure they're as dry as possible because they will be chopped up, which will release a lot of moisture. I also melted about half a tablespoon of butter in a 6-ounce ramekin to grease the inside. Once the water came to a boil, I dropped in my 3 lobster claws, and I'm letting them boil for just 2 minutes. This should make them easier to deshell but slightly undercooked because they will be heated more later. This was also a good time to preheat an oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which the mousse will later bake in. After 2 minutes, I'm fishing the claws out of their hot tub and into a bowl of ice to stop the cooking process. 2 of the claws will be turned into small pieces to be inserted into the mousse, and the third one will remain intact and placed on top of the mousse as garnish. I'm cracking all 3 claws to determine which one looked the best. To open the shell, tap the back of a knife to crack the shell around the bigger claw. Remove those shells, then twist the shell of the smaller claw to release the meat inside. There is also a piece of cartilage between the 2 claws that I'll be removing. After selecting one of my claws to be the garnish piece, I tore the other 2 into 1/4-inch pieces. If you decide to make this recipe for more than 1 serving, or you have an entire lobster to work with, use the lobster tail for this. I had a tail to work with when I was experimenting and practicing this recipe, and the texture was much better. With the lobster inserts ready, it's time to make the mousse. To reduce over-processing and heating, I left my food processor bowl in the freezer while everything was going on to chill it. On the show, one of the judges mentioned that the heat from the friction of the blades is messing up the scallops, so doing this should counter against that. I am once again patting my scallops dry before tossing them in and pulsing a few times. Then cracking an egg and separating an egg white to be poured in while pulsing, also mixing in some bits of chives, as well as about 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. Depending on how moist your scallops is, you might need more or less heavy cream. Scrape down a bowl and pulse a few more times and lightly season with some salt and white pepper. Give it a good mix to fold in the seasoning, and this was the final texture I ended up with. I scooped all of the scallop paste into the ramekin and gently filled all the crevices with a spoon. I then grabbed the lobster pieces and poked them into the scallop randomly. Finally, I smoothed the top by running the back of a spoon in a circular motion. The ramekin is wrapped in a layer of plastic film to trap all the moistures inside. However, I'm not too confident if my wrapper will burn off in the oven, so I'm wrapping another layer of aluminum foil on top. The reason I'm using both is because plastic film is much better at retaining moisture than aluminum, and aluminum is better at blocking the heat than plastic. So using them both is the best of both worlds. For even heating throughout the ramekin, I am placing it in a small cake pan lined with paper towel, then filling the pan about halfway up to the height of the ramekin with boiling water. This is going into a 300-degree oven and baked for 22 minutes, which is enough time for me to make the cream sauce that could literally make or break this dish. In my previous attempt, the sauce was terrible. I tried to do this lobster puree, and it ended up being just a mess. Anyways, in a skillet, I'm heating up about 1/4 cup of fish stock. Chef Bonacini, the judge and creator of this dish, stressed that the sauce needs to have a very light color. Fish stock is generally pretty hard to find in the market, so it's probably easier and better to make your own. The fish stock I'm working with here is kind of dark, so I already know that my sauce isn't going to come out as white as it is on the show. Once the stock comes to a simmer, I'm adding a total of 1/4 cup of heavy cream, 1 tablespoon at a time, and constantly stirring it under medium heat. Once I could see the bottom of the skillet as I'm stirring, I'm adding in 1 tablespoon of butter. This will drastically increase the thickness of the sauce and achieve that creamy texture. Taste and season with salt. I continue to stir and reduce until the sauce clings onto the back of the spoon, which is my signal to take it off the heat immediately to avoid over reducing. This whole process took me about 20 minutes, which is almost exactly the amount of time it took for the mousse to bake in the oven. During this time, I also poached my last claw in butter to bring it all the way up to temperature. Peeling back the aluminum foil and plastic wrap reveals a scallop mousse that has set to a jiggly form. I ran a knife along the walls of the ramekin to release the mousse. The mousse is turning here, meaning that it's not held by the ramekin, but the air pressure, or the lack thereof, inside is preventing it from popping out onto a plate. Once I realized that, I squeezed the mousse a little bit from the side with a knife and it popped out right away. To assemble the scallop mousse, I'm dripping a good layer of the cream sauce to a point where it drapes over the mousse. Then top it with the butter poached lobster claw, and finally sprinkling some chives to replicate the one in the show. And after that, it is complete. Okay, that's it for scallop mousse, and I actually plan to do this outro with the food in front of me so I can talk about the food while I'm giving the outro, but I ate it so quickly that I didn't have time to film. But anyways, I think it turned out quite well. Definitely not perfect, not up to what they had in the show, especially with the sauce. The color was way too dark compared to the original, so there's definitely a lot of improvements that I could make to this dish. If you guys have enjoyed this video or feel like you learned something, feel free to hit the like button and subscribing. I'll be posting more cooking and dessert and baking videos, so stay tuned for those. Until next time, I'll see you guys very soon.